Oh man. Um, yeah. Hey George.
Martin, how are you? Speaking of quantum, have you covered the fact that we're eons behind China on this and that we need to do something about it in order to be competitive?
That's interesting. As a congressman, former congressman, you may know more about this than I do. So my own 2 cents, which is probably less informed than yours, is that while China has published some stuff in the space, obviously not everyone is publishing what they need to. The centralized system they have, command and control or whatever, is kind of better for this type of thing than the system we have. And I say that as a patriot, but our system kind of relies on, well, you've got government, they're sort of hands off and they want to do some stuff, so they'll throw some money at some companies and they hope the companies figure it out. And this obviously is not the way to go if you have a Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project, we had command and control, and it worked out really well. It was like very directed,
Well,
like
well,
let's.
well play devil's advocate, but the Manhattan Project also relied on a lot of foreign intelligence, meaning foreign actors playing within the Manhattan Project that then took all of our research, stole
Right.
it, and brought it back to their homelands. Hence, everybody went to the nuclear races, right? So,
That
uh,
it is a that is a point that's very important. But I would just say
so
that if you
careful
want,
with the Manhattan Project analogies in quantum, because in Congress, when obviously in some less classified natures, we had hearings about this in 2023. Nobody was paying attention because, again, it wasn't a hot topic button, and everybody was concerned with whatever flashy, shiny thing was in front of them. But quantum computing is is literally the one thing today that should concern most people as far as the races to global dominance and to continue to be the main player, and also in a way to make up for deficits of governments on generating revenue. So
so
there's
yeah.
countries out there, real quick, Barton, and then I'll conclude it. So there's countries like China that are breaking the cycle of the only form of generating revenue that their nations have is by taxation. Like we are, our model is taxation. The United States government doesn't produce anything, right? The Chinese have kind of figured that out. We need to step up our game. Taxation is not sustainable to be the only form of funding government. So that's why I saw the title and I was like, oh fuck, I gotta chime in. So
Yeah, I mean, as a dyed-in-the-wool libertarian, I couldn't agree more that taxation is not the way to go. But in terms of quantum itself, I have a couple things to say, and your insight will actually be really helpful. So I think the main use of quantum is going to be decryption. And we talked about that for like an hour or two before you got here. And let's just run with that, assuming that that's true. So again, you're in government. You know a lot of people in government. I know a lot of the people you know in government. You know them better, and they're some of the most powerful people in the world. And the question sort of becomes, well, what can you do with this, and where's the NSA's role in the world writ large? And again, I certainly don't want you to you would never do that anyway, but I want to treat the subject a little bit gingerly because it normally is extremely sensitive. So the way I look at it, the NSA, again, not many people know the budget. There have been some leaks, documents that say the budget is anywhere between 15, 20 billion, and maybe 10 or 20% of that is compute. That's a compute budget that generally is kind of storing more than computing, I think. And one day quantum could conceivably decrypt the communications of our adversaries. Now, that's a great thing as a patriot. As a business person, the government's a perfectly fine customer, and it could potentially buy a lot of this stuff to simply do that. But one question, and again, I'm trying to phrase this like in a way that sort of makes sense to have the discussion at all, in public at least, is to the extent that appetite exists, does it make sense for these communications, which are probably like low intensity? Like I'm guessing a lot of this very sensitive communications of our adversaries may not even be over electronic channels, or they might be in an encryption form that is quantum secure. But to the extent that 20 or 30 years from now we could read communications of today, is that an interesting business? Is that something that NSA would spend many billions of dollars on? given the whole budget of the CIA and FBI, at least the FBI one is public, is about 15 billion annually, and that's for field agents and stuff like that. NSA and CIA are thought to be somewhat similar in size and scope. So I'm curious how you react to some of that in terms of like if it is just encryption decryption that is the pie here, and obviously I think it's fairly clear that sure I would love to decrypt my ex-girlfriend's communications, but ultimately from a nation state perspective, the last thing I'll add is when the WikiLeaks cables were released, they weren't that exciting, and there was a lot of that thought to be sensitive information turned out to be not that interesting at all. Everyone thought the sky would fall if those cables came out and they were published. Oh my God, the whole world would end. And it turned out that they were really just kind of boring diplomatic cables. And even if you look at the Kennedy files that have been declassified over the last 40 years, I take a look at that sometimes about like the most recently declassified stuff, and it's all very boring shit. So like it's the big secret is maybe there's an asset that we have that we don't want the adversary to know about that asset. But ultimately, I question this idea that these decryption tools would actually even be that valuable 20 or 30 years from now. I'll shut up now. I'm curious what you think.
So there's a lot of things there. I'm just going to start with the easier ones. In my time in Congress, the amount of classified briefings I had were numerous, especially at the brink of October 7th and all of that stuff in Israel, and then also prior to that, the Chinese spy balloon, so on and so forth, right? So I've learned one thing, Martin, and I've said this openly here. Classified is laughable, at least at the clearance level we had as Congress people, right? Maybe there's more interesting stuff at higher levels with the Joint Chiefs and the Pentagon, but as far as Congress goes, I can say pretty openly, um, classified stuff is pretty boring. It's not a matter of the type of information. It's not like it's of nuclear catastrophic ramifications. It's more so intelligence that we don't want our adversaries knowing because then they can premeditate our steps or our way of thinking and so on and so forth. So it's giving too much. The reason something is deemed classified sometimes it's because it gives too much foresight into our positioning on, let's say, an issue, a war, a conflict, whatever, for our enemies, and they can start to forecast, right, movement. That's why classified stuff usually is pretty boring because it's classified in the nature of it's not that it's a big deal secret here for us. It's more so from who's divulging this and dissecting this. So moving past that, as far as quantum computing goes, I've actually done 2 floor speeches on this and touched on this issue. I've argued on a bill in a committee on this as well. Quantum computing is not, it's beyond just decoding and being able to decrypt information. It's about speed. It's about cutting edge. It's about literally decentralizing and, or in some cases, even centralizing technology. It depends on which way you're going to apply this, right? For instance, in the case of the Chinese government that I mentioned earlier, there's enough documentation out there to show, and based on information we received in the House at the time, is that there's use of this to create to fill deficiencies in productivity, even, and for a government to be able to trade more efficiently on the overnight banking, overnight bidding, and with Federal Reserves all across the world, and all of these different aspects and gambits that can solve a lot of efficiency gaps in governments, right? Such as ours, which leads me back to the statement I said. The United States government doesn't generate anything. That's why it relies exclusively on taxation. And because of its reliance on taxation, and there being, quite frank, a limit on how much the American public's going to generate, that's going to generate tax revenue. Hence, we have 36 on our way to $37 trillion of debt. I believe quantum computing applied appropriately outside of the scope just of espionage and decryption can help bridge gaps of inefficiencies within our government. So, going back to your question about the NSA, FBI, and CIA and budgets, I don't know the actual answer that I can give you. I can say that the agencies do not necessarily, the closed agencies that don't have their budgets public and such, like the Pentagon, who also doesn't have a line item budget for everything for national security reasons, such as CIA and NSA. Um, their budgets are not to be confused with FBI. I've said this before. The FBI has a public budget for a reason. They're a law enforcement agency of such with investigative powers. The NSA and the CIA, their scope of work is far beyond just investigative powers. And therefore, in some cases, it's to be argued that their budget is really what they need, not necessarily a set dollar. Although there might be like a line item that we determine on for that. So, to answer your question from a CIA NSA side, I think we ought to be pouring billions into quantum computing, and we ought to be recruiting Manhattan style recruitment, but with guardrails and with advocation of citizenships or whatever the case it takes to get the brightest, sharpest minds from around the world. But hey, you want to come work on this project? Your citizenship is now to the United States. You renounce any other citizenship, and we keep you on a leash. I'm not saying it's slavery or entrapment, but you are subscribing to a super classified, ultra classified project, and these are the guidelines. We're not going to give you the keys to the kingdom so you can run off and give it to Afghanistan or wherever the fuck you come from. So we did that already with the Manhattan Project, and look how much nuclear weaponry we have around the world because of Oppenheimer's technology, right? And the Manhattan Project technology. So back to the deficiencies in quantum, politicians are thick. Remember, the people who would pass funding for this are the same people asking just a few years back, Martin, what is Facebook? Is it a book full of faces? So the problem we have is that we have an overly decaying government making decisions for the future for our generation and beyond that don't seem to understand the basics of technology, let alone understand self reliant and sophisticated advanced technology like quantum, like crypto, and AI. So our issue is more than just one, but I hope that gives you the answer you're looking for in a roundabout kind of like avoiding landmines for my sakes before somebody knocks on my door and say, "Oh, Mr. Santos, you overspoke." So I hope that helps give you kind of the vision I'm trying to put here and what actually happens in the back end and in Congress in general.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. I think we do have some disagreements, but I do want to give other people a chance to talk too.
We will
Mary.
always disagree, Martin, but that's
Martin,
what makes healthy discussion. So I appreciate you.
Martin, can I ask about Beth and what he's doing with
Yeah, sure.
thermodynamic
I can't
computing?
I
And
can't speak for him necessarily, but sure.
yeah, sure. Just like you know, first of all, I just not to blow you up, but I love how you get to, cut through the bullshit. Is there a market there? Can you make money in this market? Does anybody want this product or this tech? And it's so much missing in so much of the conversation. But if you were to steel man what Beth is doing, what? So to my understanding, thermodynamic computing creates a bunch of random numbers. They can use that in training. Okay, great. But beyond that, what is there as a product for him if he does succeed, and maybe what the chances are?
Yeah, I mean, I can't pontificate too much on what he's doing because it's fairly he hasn't given too many details out. But I do think that non-transistor based computing has been overlooked, whether it's quantum, thermodynamic, or anything else, DNA. We can use nature to compute things, and we did it with transistors. There's no reason transistors are very special, but there's no reason there aren't other special things that we can do computation with. And to George's point, there's a lot of things that need computation. I do challenge the idea that, as I spoke about earlier a couple hours ago, what exactly do we need to compute, and why don't our current computers work enough? And I think a lot of this is, there are more human problems with this than anything else. It also questions the scope of government, which is how much does it make sense for government to do basic research? As a science guy, I love the government doing basic research, but also, a lot of that is about just seeing where you go and publishing, and some things not published, of course, and just sort of meandering, and you never know what you'll find. But that's not what business is. When business tried to do this, it worked and it didn't. Bell Labs worked really well in one hand. It didn't make AT&T any money. And AT&T had Bell Labs as almost like a public good. And Google sort of does this as a public good too. And quantum is part of Google's public good. It's not really part of a money-making enterprise for them. So the companies that are trying to be money-making enterprises on quantum, they're sort of quasi-science experiments, and they get funded by kind of people that are really optimistic about the future and have this vision of it. But at the same time, like, there doesn't, to me, there doesn't appear to be a clear business. And I don't think that means George is wrong, by the way. I think that the government should fund the impossible. They should fund the things that don't make sense for business to fund. Because if business can fund them, that's fine. We have Lockheed and we have, Boeing, and they could do classified research, and that's great. But if there's something where business doesn't make sense to fund because, like, we're 30 years away from actually getting physical qubits, then government should do it. But should it be stuff that's at a publicly traded for-profit company, or should it be that is wholly dependent on this? To me, that feels a little strange. Like,
Well, Martin, can I just throw something in
yeah,
there? Part of the issue that we are behind is that our public private partnerships have prioritized being hammers and treating everything as nails instead of innovating. Now, I'm not saying that Boeing and Lockheed aren't innovating, but if you look at their scope of R&D, research and development, versus their scope of production on what's already developed, it's lopsided. I mean, their R&D computes for about 20-25% of all their operations versus producing hammers for nails that are known are more profitable. So these companies look at what they can earn in the right now with a very small sense of projection for the future. All of a sudden, the rush for technology almost seems to have died down, as if we've reached a plateau. Remember when it was about the fastest airplane and the biggest airplane, and now I just feel like it's like airplanes. We just mass manufacture them. We put some little nuances to them, but sometimes they glitch and fucking doors blow mid-flight. Like we can't even seem to get to manufacturing airplanes right now that are safe. I mean, they are safe, but I'm just saying without having glitches on them. So I think that there's this lopsided value system also in the public private sector, which leads me to believe that the government should be doing bids on grants from an entrepreneurial side and, putting people through the ringer to put them and give them classified levels and put them through all the screenings and the background checks and security clearances and all what they have to do and create a race for the moon essentially all over again, like we did in the 1950s. So I think this would be very smart for the government to come in and say, "Hey, we have a ton of R&D. We want to have new tech. We want to have advancements, and we don't want the same old tired players who seem to be sitting pretty and
yeah,
resting their
no,
laurels."
that makes a ton of sense. But I think we're too early. So one of the things in quantum is this idea of Shor's algorithm, which is you can factor big numbers more easily. And the problem is, I've spent the last several months programming quantum computers to do this, and they haven't been able to really do it. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying. And the question is, like, does it make sense for us to spend, or does it make sense even for a company? Forget the government. Does it make sense for a company like one of these publicly traded companies? And a full disclosure, I'm a short seller of all these companies. Well, I still also love quantum computing. Does it make sense for one of these companies for their job to be that the government is going to pay them money to potentially, hopefully, factor numbers? To me, that seems like a really weird business model. I'm getting paid by the government, and I'm giving them something they want. I'm a contractor. Now, Boeing's a contractor. But the thing I'm delivering isn't useful. Boeing delivers useful things. They're, very important for warfare. But the quantum computing I'm delivering is a bridge. It might be a bridge to nowhere. It might be a bridge to something useful. But should these companies be subsisting on government funds for the next 20 years? There's no practical industrial application that we can see. We discussed this at length. And that, again, that could change. It probably will change. But as of now, there's no utility. So this has happened before, where AI had two big winters, where government was the only funder of AI, and government gave up on AI twice, including industry. Industry often follows government in academia as well. And so, you have these boom and bust cycles. There was a big boom cycle in the 80s called expert systems. And then there was a big bust when companies tried to implement and didn't do what was promised, and they give up. Obviously, AI is hot again, and it seems really awesome. And it's I think, going to help the economy and the budget and all that way more than quantum. Quantum's time could be 2040 or 2050 or 2060. And Jensen Huang came out the other day and said we're at least 15 years away and probably closer to 30 years away, which is, in my opinion, true. So let academics do this. Academics can do this work. They can get funding from NIH or whatever it is, maybe not NIH, DARPA or someone like that. And they can, as academics get it closer to reality, then we can get there. Because to me, this is like talking about a really out there kind of concept, like, I don't know, cold fusion or space travel or something like that. It's a little, in my opinion, it's a little far fetched. And certainly the stock market has gotten ahead of itself. The government side is sort of a totally different scope, right? The government has a lot of different scopes that we as stock traders don't necessarily understand or can appreciate. So what the government should be doing is one thing, but the public traded stocks, it's hard for me to imagine them sort of subsisting on this for the next 20 or 30 years, hopefully one day being able to deliver a useful product. Anyway, I want Sebastian, who's been waiting patiently, to say his piece.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So I just want to add a couple things. Since George started speaking, I think the best example for quantum is, like, imagine if SpaceX was in the 60s to get us to the moon. It's like, and there wasn't the Cold War. It's like, would there really have been the strong profit incentive where it's like, okay, we get to the moon. All right, now what? We're going to mine some moon rocks? Like, how do you make money off of this? I think it was better for government to have done it, because it's like, okay, we have to beat the Soviets. All right, there's the
Right.
tax spend demands, the intellectual capital. Okay, there. We don't, like, it's there for quantum, but it's like, yeah, I do think the government on some level should at least be invested in it, but it's not to the point. Okay, like George is saying, China's developing it, right? So where is China getting with it? I mean, we don't know. It's nothing really tangible yet, but it could be soon. So, but that's, again, it's something out there. It's something that's going to take maybe 20, 30 years. So I think it's almost better to approach this from, like you said, the academic, the government perspective, than it is from the, the market perspective.
Yeah, you can't make a business on this. I mean, if you try,
Yeah, right, Mark.
any
You can't yet.
any any recession that comes along blows you up, because you ultimately need investors to say, I will pay for this. And investors, as of now, these companies have not been able to get the government to pay for it meaningfully, and they've gotten contracts. But investors have to be able to pony up the money, and investors know government, as you said, can be fickle. They can, Doge can decide tomorrow, nope, we're not paying for this. Or they could decide we're 10xing the budget. We just don't know. Investors, when there's a recession, budgets get cut. Even government takes a step back and says maybe we should cut back on spending. And a lot of the budget, as you know, is fixed. In Medicare, Medicaid, and NASA, even NASA's budget gets cut. So there's ultimately only so much money to dole out, and you have people like Vivek and Trump and Musk saying we're going to cut this freaking budget to zero. And I think that if you're a fan of quantum, well, that's a problem, because the
Yeah,
only customers. That stuff is government.
Yeah, because it's like you have to produce results. Like, what did you do today? It's like
Right.
that's a trouble
And
to do for quantum. And obviously, if like I'm not doubting that China could have something like that, but they would definitely show it off, like the Soviets showed off Sputnik to
and
say,
they've
"Look, we
published.
put it
They,
there."
Well,
they've
remember
published.
one thing though, but you're dealing with Elon Musk, who this is very much in his realm, and he's a visionary, right? This is a guy who built SpaceX, and he's taking us to Mars. So I find his application of Doge more so geared towards. I'll give an example. Hundreds of reports that are ordered from Congress annually, some from
Sure.
dead senators, by the way, seriously, that are still funded, that nobody reads and cost millions of dollars. That the level of cuts are not on
But
actual.
I would argue that funding a quantum computer that can barely divide 77 into 11 and 7 is also a boondoggle.
That that gets me into my second point really quick, which is like, okay, if we want to really let quantum computing take off, it has to first be able to solve everything classical. Okay, before we even get to
Well,
the
I
quantum
don't know about that.
space.
Don't you have? I would say that it has to solve one thing really well.
Yeah, yeah.
It
Well,
doesn't have to solve
obviously,
everything.
well, yeah, but for it to be like as publicly accepted, it's like it has to
Oh,
be reliable.
GPUs don't run Windows. They don't run right, but they're useful for a certain narrow application. And I think it's okay to have a new class of computers that is really good at decryption or really good at Grover's algorithm, which we haven't talked about today, which is kind of the search algorithm. Um, you know, it's fine. I mean, it's okay. So anyway, I'm just trying to. I'll let you speak, but I
It,
just wanted to give
yeah,
you my thoughts.
that's no, because that gets me into my next point, which is like, okay, these are the classical problems that we understand today. There's obviously going to be problems that show up in the future that are like, okay, these are quantum specific problems because it
See,
comes
I don't.
from
So I don't know about that because it's sort of like there's this joke that my girlfriend and I and the whole EAC and teapot community kind of do sometimes. The jobs of the future, and one of the jobs of the future is boson cutter. Another job is like, tachyon, rift dweller or something like that.
well,
And
yeah, but that
like the quantum mechanical scale, okay, is just not something humans have to deal with ever.
Hold on, real quick,
And
Martin, as a devil's advocate here, and I know I'm stretching here, so Sebastian, indulge me. With all this talk of space travel and all those big numbers in computing that we will be facing down, is it not fair to say that if Elon
yeah, yeah.
has his
I
way
mean,
over at
50,
Mars, there's going to be a shit ton of massive
yeah,
math.
50 or 100 years from now totally makes sense. Like, we may actually be working in that quantum realm more often, but I feel like this is such science fiction, and I'm a
I know
science
it
fiction
is.
guy. Like, this is what I like. And for me, it's like, what role do we as investors in the publicly traded markets, the government, from your perspective, Mr. Santos, and others, what role does science fiction play in our lives? And of course, we've learned over 100 or even 1,000 years that science fiction can often turn into science fact.
I mean, I don't
And
know. Last Steven Spielberg, he seems to know a thing or two.
yeah, over time, these inventions become real, and they're exciting, and they're what keep people alive. They're what keep people's hearts going. And it's been well documented that the race to the moon was not just flying to some rock. It was way more than that. And I do think that's why I even care about this space. The race to factor a really big number, it actually means a lot to me. I can feel it in my bones. It's a really big deal to anyone who's a really super nerd. But again, where's the business? Why is the stock trading like it is? I can start a quantum computing company tomorrow that does everything Rigetti and IonQ do, but it's not worth 10 billion.
Right.
Science experiments. Again, human genome sciences that decoded the genome uh, back when George was in elementary school. The these guys were trading for 10 billion, and they ended up trading for 1 billion after people realized decoding the human genome was not actually that important of a step as they thought. We had genetics before that, by the way, And, sequencing genomes cheaply was something that was important, but that company didn't end up doing that. So these quantum pioneers, which I really think IBM and Google are the pioneers, and those companies are equipped to work with government because the small companies like Rigetti and IonQ, they need PR to survive. And they need to actually say, hey, we did this for NSA. Google and IBM don't need quantum to survive, but they could do that and keep it quiet and say, yeah, we've quietly been working for NSA over the last 10 years, and nobody needs to know that we've been doing that. Whereas I think IonQ is like, no, this is our only customers right now of IonQ is the Air Force Research Lab, which, again, I don't know who they have on payroll to have gotten them that contract, but they're not getting DoD, they're not getting Pentagon, they're not getting NSA, or CIA, or anybody else. They're getting Air Force. And again, I don't know what it means exactly, but it's not a big contract. And ultimately, I think Air Force is going to say, and it could be simply the changeover of some Air Force guy or a changeover of the Trump administration or the next administration. But eventually, somebody at Air Force is going to say, yeah, we don't really need quantum that bad. Let's wait. Let's give this a couple years. Stop wasting money on this, because what actually have they delivered? And if you're IonQ, you'll give a presentation once a year to the Air Force people and say, well, this year we've been able to have a 100 qubit machine. And last year it was like 35 qubits. And the next year maybe they'll have 400 qubits. But we need millions of qubits to actually calculate anything. And again, I've shed questions as to what exactly can these machines calculate that we can't calculate without them. For example, we learned about Chinese hacks recently. They didn't need quantum computing to hack our systems. They have traditional spies that walk right in. They've got old school hackers. They've got new school hackers. They've got all kinds of stuff for us to share and steal information. And of course, from a patriotic perspective, I don't want them doing that, and I want us to protect our information. But at the same time, again, I point to the WikiLeaks debacle where when the WikiLeaks cables were announced, they're going to release all these diplomatic cables. They actually made it suspenseful. They said they're going to do it tomorrow. I got all the popcorn I could find, and I said, oh man, I can't wait to read these leaks. Imagine what they're going to have in them. And it was a big nothing burger. People said, the Russians make fun of the Americans. The Americans call the Russians a bunch of drunks. The Chinese laugh at both of them. And there was nothing there that was actually secret or interesting. And, part of the reason is the world's a lot less, I think, mysterious than people give it credit for. And espionage is important, but it's not, something that I think necessarily the government is going to break the bank and say, we need to spend $100 billion on espionage tomorrow. I do think we need basic research, and quantum mechanics is something that is still fascinating, still hard to, learn about. But there's other areas like energy, energy fusion and things like that. Fusion could solve a lot of energy problems. That's a competing thing we need to invest in. Quantum, like I said, I love it, so there's nothing I have against it. But Alzheimer's is something we need to invest a lot of money into. It's a serious medical threat. Future pandemics, possibly. Other types of advanced technologies that our government should be funding, because industry sort of can't fund them because their purview is too distant. So it's not just quantum computing. So I think the government's going to be measured and smart about, not dunking the whole budget into one thing that may or may not be even relevant. But if you could tell me today, based on this algorithm, this is exactly what quantum computing can do, and it'll put us, in matter teleportation or free energy or something like that. It'd be nice to have free energy. But that's not the promise of quantum computing yet. We just don't know where it's going to lead.
Unless
right now,
you had
it's
the
about dividing numbers.
Chinese is the boogeyman, like the Soviets were, because then it's you put the fear in everybody that they're gonna,
And it's not a bad catalyst. It's not a bad catalyst.
Exactly, that would be the catalyst. It wouldn't be, I'm gonna 50x my investment because this is the next Nvidia.
It's about what the Chinese or whichever geopolitical adversary is doing,
or whatever.
That's kind of the crux of how the government spends its money. And
China publishes nonstop in Nature and an archive, and it's super impressive. And as an American, I clench my fist and say, why are China's doing they did the first quantum secure network. Wow. Why didn't we do that?
Exactly,
and, it's an impressive feat. You've tamed the universe to your will. That's incredible. And it was Chinese researchers. Now, they may be lying. They may have done it. They may not have done it. We don't know. But the point is, it's future technology, and the mark of a civilization is how advanced is its technology. And we look at other countries that could barely filter their water. Their oxygen is diluted with all kinds of terrible emissions, like India. And we say, what can you do that nobody can do? Now, America's been the leader in every field ever. And to George's point, there is one field that China seems to, and again, we don't know for sure, but they seem to be racing ahead, which is quantum. Now, again, maybe China's got this really big interest in reading our shit, and they do seem to love their espionage. And so they really want to learn all of American communications and secrets. Fine. Well, ultimately, our interest in this is much more, I think, national defense than it is, necessarily learning somebody else's secrets. And we don't want another 9/11 to ever happen. We don't want another attack on American soil, and it's something we should protect for. But ultimately, we have bigger fish to fry than just encryption, decryption. I think AI, can save our country's entire budget. I think, other advanced technologies can, like energy side, could be really important in the way, we take care of our planet and take care of certain expenses. So, there's a lot to do. And I think quantum is just a small piece of this pie. And it's again, this call is about these stocks. It's not necessarily about quantum computing writ large. It's about, are these stocks good buys or not? And I think the answer is conclusively no. Nevertheless, it's still an interesting field. Again, I'm fascinated by this field for a reason. It's an awesome field. But I wouldn't touch the stocks with a 10-foot pole. I would even encourage you to bet against them, not because I'm a bad guy or an evil or vengeful guy, but because that's probably going to make you money. And if you're buying these stocks, rushing into this thinking you're getting to the next gold rush, I think you're going to be surprised that these companies will actually not have accomplished very much a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. If anything, the upside might come from an IBM or a Google or another privately held company that's being funded by Eric Schmidt or someone like that. These publicly traded companies are the dogs that could not find private funding, and they were forced to go public through SPACs. That's the Kamath thing. And that many of you know, SPACs existed before Kamath, by the way. But, these were not the pick of the litter. The pick of the litter was already, these are the orphans. These are the runts. I look at my cat, Nibbles, who's the runt of the litter. And I still love Nibbles, but these aren't stocks you should love. So anyway, that's my piece on that. I'm going to probably get to bed soon unless anybody wants their last.
I just wanted to say I'm off to bed, but thanks for the space. Thanks for the mind.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Any last?
Yeah, don't be a stranger. Don't disappear.
I won't.
All right, talk to you.
You can't imagine. Yeah, thank you, George. I'm just so busy lately. It's insane. I haven't had any time for anything. Any last thoughts from anyone?
One last thing.
Martin, could I ask one?
Yeah,
one
let
last
Mario
quick one?
go.
What do you think is underfunded right now, if anything?
Alzheimer's. Yeah, Alzheimer's is going to destroy our civilization. We're going to be old, tottering, demented people unless we actually solve this problem. And cassava was a stock that I shorted very famously. And people were saying, Martin, don't you want to have a drug for Alzheimer's for your family or for yourself? Of course I do. But cassava didn't help that. It hurt that. Funding bad ideas doesn't help the good ideas, or it doesn't help attract new capital. It doesn't mean anything. So Alzheimer's is something where drug companies have a hard time tackling it because it's a 20, 30, 40-year disease, and a patent lasts 17 years. Your patents expire. So it's hard for a drug company.
What do you think the odds are we'll have something good in the next 10 years on Alzheimer's?
I hope so, but ultimately, it's a government job because Pfizer can't invest in a 30-year clinical trial. It doesn't make sense. They'll never get their money back. The patent will expire before the trial even comes out. And if you want to do a 20, 30-year trial, because Alzheimer's is a very weird disease that starts in your 40s and only manifests clinically, like in your 60s or 70s, where it's thought to be too late. It's too late for Alzheimer's to intervene in Alzheimer's when you're 70. So anyway, that's one thing that I think is underfunded. Energy is another thing where if you want to really tame the universe to your will, energy is the place to do it. Energy is we have this, many billions of dollars, where we need to, many trillions of dollars where we spend money. And I think that there's, a lot of, just gaps there where, we could potentially really get energy to a place where it's cheaper and more, just a lot, sort of better position. Sorry, my cats are fighting here, so I'm a little distracted. So I think that's a place where, getting fusion to work or something like that, nuclear, those are places where we can invest. Quantum's just a little too out there, I think. It's like saying we want to invest in space travel or something like that, or like teleportation or something nonsensical. It's just too sci-fi. Okay, any last thoughts?
Zach, Martin, is it the best idea to touch ivermectin since you spoke about cassava?
There's not much to say on ivermectin other than it doesn't work, and
I do agree.
I almost bought ivermectin from Merck years ago, and Merck refused to sell it because they said it had like this heritage to Merck, which it did. They even had a statue of, a guy who was involved in ivermectin in their headquarters. So like they didn't want to part with it. And eventually the drug went generic. In fact, it was my friend's company that made the first and only generic for ivermectin. And so it wouldn't have been a great acquisition for me anyway. But I know the drug really, really well. And I think just like quantum is not about quantum is about gambling, so too ivermectin isn't about medicine. Ivermectin is really about the distrust of authority. So ivermectin stands as a metaphorical symbol for people distrusting Dr. Fauci, US government, all this stuff. Trust of government is at an all-time low. So if you want to be a rebel, what do you say? Well, I don't trust this system. I'm going to trust this thing I heard about that's against this system. It doesn't matter if it's real or not. I just don't like it. It kind of reminds me when you're 6 years old and you're fighting some kid in kindergarten and they say, well, I like this. And you say, well, I hate that. And they say something like, I like bubblegum. And you say, I hate bubblegum. It's stupid. And you know in your heart of hearts that you love bubblegum. But you just disagree with the guy because you're in a fight. And I think that is kind of what's happening here with ivermectin. I don't think anybody actually sits there and says this is a cure for cancer. I think people are sitting there saying, well, I really don't trust my doctor. I hate pharmaceutical companies. I hate HMOs. I hate PBMs. I hate all the bullshit around medicine. So, I am willing to just disagree with the system just to piss the system off or just to show that people are upset with the system. There's a guy that killed somebody over this recently. So believing in ivermectin is a very small protest relative to the huge protest of what happened with the UNH CEO. So I feel like, this is more about, this is a functional impact of the functional manifestation of that distrust. And it's a willingness to be idiotic. It's a willingness to be irrational for the sake of making a statement. And I think, again, the guy who conducted the terrible act was willing to do that too. It was very irrational. This guy is not changing a thing by murdering somebody. All he's doing is getting life in prison. He's not, sending a message to anybody. People just think it's a heinous thing that he's done. Some crazy people think it's a good thing. But in essence, it's extremely irrational to go kill somebody to make a political statement. Nevertheless, he did it. And, so appreciating ivermectin, which is a great drug for certain infectious diseases, as a potential drug for other diseases is, again, it was thought to be drug for COVID. Well, COVID went away, so COVID doesn't matter anymore. So we need to, well now it works for cancer. And it's so stupid. And of course, there are some preclinical work that may suggest that, it could be interesting to look at in cancer, but it's so far, there's about 80 million compounds that have lab bench work that make them interesting for cancer. That doesn't make them cancer drugs. That makes them cancer candidate drugs. And again, there's 80 million of them. Pick a random article in PubMed. You will stumble upon a drug that might be a cancer cure. It does not make it a cancer cure. So,
Martin, I 100% agree with what you're saying. But do you know how many clinical trials is ongoing now in US investigating ivermectin and anti-cancer activity based on clinicaltrial.org?
No, how many?
Only one trial. And the most interesting part that Mel Gibson said he has 3 friends, all had stage 4 cancer, and now they are cancer-free, right? Yeah. And it turned out that Mel Gibson lived in Los Angeles. This clinical trial is in Los Angeles, in Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. And Mel Gibson donated to that Cedars-Sinai Medical Center about $5 million a few years ago. It's funny enough. And you know what? The condition to participate in the trial, the treatment condition is stage 4 cancer. which
Okay.
also ticked the box. And this is a combination of ivermectin and PD-1 inhibitor balstilimab. So it's a combo trial. It's a single-arm, open-label study conducted by one doctor in Bethesda-Sinai clinic. So can he accidentally disclose the trial results? No.
Well, that's fine, but PD-1 is Merck's drug, and ivermectin is off-label, so he can disclose whatever he wants, and the doctors can disclose them. But PD-1 is what's doing the work there.
Right. And it's not Merck's. It's not a Merck. It's by a small biotech company called Agenus, ticker symbol AGEN.
There's like 20 companies that have PD-1s. So it's not like they're all the same. It's Coke and Pepsi. Merck has Keytruda. Agenus has their drug. Bristol Myers has Opdivo. Roche has Tecentriq. Everyone has a PD-1 inhibitor. And PD-1 inhibitors are known to be fantastic cancer drugs. They were the first, I would say since 2005, the first really exciting new mechanism for cancer. And that's why Merck has its biggest selling drug is a PD-1 inhibitor. So to me, if you tell me that, diet and exercise, let's say I'm 300 pounds, and then a year later, I'm 180 pounds, and people say, wow, what'd you do? And I said, well, I wore this special Yankees hat, and the Yankees hat made me lose weight. And they said, really? What else did you do? I said, well, I think it's all in the Yankees hat, but I also went on Ozempic and dieted and exercised and trained for marathons. I said, Martin, I don't think it's the Yankees hat that lost you 120 pounds. I think it's probably the diet and exercise and the Ozempic you did. So, no, it's the Yankees hat. So it's kind of retarded because ivermectin doesn't have any known anti-cancer properties, but Keytruda is the freaking cancer cure. So you give Keytruda and ivermectin. Right. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't be that surprised if the cancer goes away.
Right. Keytruda is the best-selling cancer drug of all the time, but this PD-1 inhibitor from Agenus is like the analog of Keytruda. Yeah, thanks a lot for your comments. Thank you.
Antibody is an antibody, right? So there's subtle differences in antibodies, like the FC region and binding affinity and, affinity for other off-target things. But ultimately, it seems to be that all the PD-1 antibodies are basically all the same. But the trial data is what differentiates them. Merck did a really good job of doing clinical trials in almost every cancer, whereas the other companies kind of were slower to do it. So Merck has the most revenue. But, there's plenty of revenue from the other PD-1s too, and maybe Agenus will have some as well. But yeah, it's kind of a funny thing that, if those patients are just getting ivermectin and the tumor's disappearing and it's real, I would say, wow, I'm wrong. It's unbelievable. But if they're getting ivermectin and the best known cancer drug at the same time, I think ivermectin's doing absolutely nothing. And the best known cancer drug of all time is what's actually shrinking the tumors. So anyway, time to go. Thank you guys so much. Have a great night. Appreciate it.